Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we're releasing a bonus episode. This is my recent appearance on the Evolved Man podcast with Steve Cutler. This episode was number 148 that he's ever done, and the title is Casey Ruff, Blue Zones, Breakfast is the most important meal, ? And why you need to rethink what you eat. This was released on October 27th of 2023. We have also hosted Steve Cutler on our show twice. So we hosted him back on episode 222, and we have hosted him also more recently on episode 409, where he talked a little bit about his recent diagnosis of ADHD and how a low carbohydrate diet was kind of helping him deal with that. So very interesting episode. So be sure to check that out. Before I jumped on the call with Steve, who's a very dear friend of mine, we always have really long and interesting conversations whenever we get together. He asked me how much time I had available for that interview. And I told him, look, I probably have 2 hours before my next appointment. I have quite a bit of time. And we used a good chunk of that 2 hours. So this episode is an hour and 40 minutes long. And it's part of Steve's rebrand of his podcast. So he was hosting the Evolve podcast and recently decided to rebrand to the Evolved Man podcast. And as part of that, he's doing longer form interviews, which are really interesting and entertaining, and definitely would highly recommend that you check those out. In this episode, we are talking about the Blue Zones and a recent documentary that was featured on Netflix called Live to 100, The Secrets of the Blue Zones. It's just, I really get a little bit ticked off when we have these cultural kind of ideas about where people are living the longest and what diets they're eating versus what we tell people that they eat, and to push a plant-based agenda in some of these areas is just ridiculous. So we've done several different episodes about Blue Zones recently with James Connolly. We're going to have one with Dr. Bill Schindler, who came on the show, who's actually just in a Blue Zone in Sardinia and ate more meat than he said he even ate at home. And yet they say it's they eat lots of minestrone soup or whatever, and it's a very plant-based community, and that's absolutely not the case. So anyway, if you want to check out the episode that we are referring to in this episode, we did that one recently here on Boundless Body Radio, where we took a composite of lots of different people talking about Blue Zones. You'll want to check out episode 530, which was titled Special Episode, Living to Age 100, The Truth About the Blue Zones. So anyway, as always, hope you enjoy this episode. Be sure to like and subscribe to Steve and his channel. Be sure to give him a rating and review so he can get his message out to more people. Please do the same for us if you haven't already, and sit back and enjoy this bonus episode.
Over the past few years, Netflix has been pumping out some pretty propaganda-driven, quote-unquote, documentaries. From The Game Changers to the latest work of fiction, Live to 100. One of my favorite platforms has now turned into a space for pseudoscience to be perpetuated. Now, today's guest is a returning guest, someone that we've had on before, and somebody who is a good friend that has created an episode that's probably one of my favorite all-time podcast episodes, because he took from one of hundreds of episodes that he has recorded on his podcast, Boundless Body Radio, and has pulled together some of the best information from true experts, people who are debunking this concept that a vegan diet and this vegan propaganda, and the fact that if you eat vegan, you're going to live to be 100 and beyond, because they live in some magical place called the Blue Zone. We're going to talk about the real science. We're going to talk about why that propaganda is propagated, and many, many more topics. That's on today's episode of The Evolved Man. Welcome to The Evolved Man, where we are at war with the mediocrity of modern man. The Evolved Man is for men like you who are willing to be strong, open, and aggressive learners. Men who are not afraid to disrupt and change. It's time we ditch the current conventional idea that we devolve with age, that the dad bod is our destiny, and that the glory days are behind us. Your best isn't behind you. And I'm here to provide you with practical tools, a few tips and tricks, and everyday wisdom to help you evolve into your highest form. Strong, lean, smart, educated, and emotionally intelligent. Now, let's go to war. Welcome back to the Evolved Man, where we are at war with the mediocrity of modern man. Before I want to get started, I want to thank the episode sponsor today, MedOne Capital. I want to thank you for sponsoring the Evolved Man. We appreciate all the support. The MedOne Group exists for the sole purpose of making needed medical equipment available to the healthcare industry. You can find out more information at themedonegroup.com. Today's guest is a returning guest, someone who is a good friend of mine and someone who, when we get together to chat over coffee, it basically sounds like two podcasters getting together, asking each other questions. And I don't know that we really keep tally, but I think in each other's minds, we do keep tally of who asks the most questions. My good friend, Casey Ruff, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to be here with you. And I do have to say, before we start trashing Netflix documentaries, we have to remember that Netflix also made Drive to Survive, which is the greatest documentary ever made, and got the two of us into a completely new sport that neither one of us was interested in.
You know, it's so funny you bring that up because I'm literally watching or rewatching that series every night. I've gone back to season 1, episode 1. I am currently rewatching. I think last night when I turned it off to go to bed, I was on season 2, episode 4 or 5. And yeah, I'm hooked. I mean, it is the best documentary. And so I don't know where you were at a few years ago with this, but I started watching what was happening in the NBA. And I grew up watching the NBA. I grew up watching college football and a little bit of NFL, some MLB. You know, I just loved sports. Little by little, I'm watching these guys and I'm thinking, man, number one, I don't care about your politics. I don't go to my doctor and ask my doctor about politics, and he doesn't shove it down my throat. My accountant doesn't do the same thing. I'm watching basketball players to play basketball. Don't throw your political stance at me. I don't care. I'm just watching play basketball. So I became a little bit jaded and I thought, well, I want to watch something. I want to shift to something. What is there? And so I'm looking around. I find rugby. I'm like, there's not a lot of rugby in the US, but you know, I've got a friend of mine, Larry Gelwicks, who was the top rugby coach in America. We had him on the podcast for one of the episodes, and then
he's amazing.
F1 and Drive to Survive just like popped into my life. And I was like, holy shit, are you kidding me?
Dude, it kept popping up as my recommended, like on my recommended list. I'm like, why is it recommending car racing? I don't give a shit about car racing.
You don't give a shit about cars.
No, not at all. Not at all.
You don't even care about cars at all. You are the least out of all of my friends, and a lot of my friends are car guys. You're the least car guy that I'm friends with.
My car is 3 years old now. I still call it my new car because it's the first car I ever purchased from new. It was the first car that I test drove because it was a stick shift, and that's all I wanted.
Nice.
A 2020 Jetta, which I absolutely love. Yeah, it's not breaking speed records.
No, it's a great little car. I've got a Jetta for my daughter.
It's awesome. But yeah, so this show pops up and keeps popping up, and I'm like, okay, fine. 5 minutes. I'm going to give this thing 5 minutes. I start watching it. Within 2 minutes, I'm just like, my jaw's on the ground. It's so exciting and intense. And like the show, I mean, frankly, the show is not as much about car racing. It is about the personalities and the storylines. Right. But that's what made it interesting for Bethany to watch. Bethany doesn't watch the races. I watch the races now. Bethany does not, but she loves Charles Leclerc for very obvious reasons.
Yeah, he's a great looking guy.
Good looking dude.
Yeah.
But to see the story, to see the intensity, how they train was super interesting. Like all of it was, just absolutely wonderful. So before we bash Netflix documentaries, we do have to make a plug for one of our favorites.
Yeah, that's why I say it's one of my favorite platforms, because I do watch a lot of stuff on Netflix, but holy cow, a lot of their stuff now that they're putting out like this Live to 100, it's so mind-blowing. But let's just pause for a second. Okay, if we were to pick a team that we wanted to look like, it'd have to be the Ferrari team, right? I mean, you look at Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc. That's a couple of good-looking men right there.
Dashingly good-looking, for sure.
Driving over 200 miles an hour in the fastest cars in the world, and then they stand out. It's like, and I'm a model. Yeah, exactly. I'm not gay, but you know what? If I had the opportunity, I would probably. Those two, that's the best looking team out there. Exactly. Right?
Yeah, no judgment.
And you gotta love Bottas and his the mullet. I mean, there's a lot of great characters
So
in
good.
F1, but
Absolutely so good.
it's become my favorite thing. I've actually learned. There was one time where I texted you. I was like, "Dude, look, can you believe it?" And you're like, "Oh, I haven't watched it yet. I'm with a client. I'm going to go home and watch the race later." And so, I've learned I have to ask you the question before I send it the text of like, "Have you watched it yet?"
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
sometimes I'm in the same boat where I haven't watched the race. I'm watching it later on, and I watch the replay. But I got to be honest with you, I have a hard time. I'll get partway through the race and I'll just pop up Instagram and I'm like, oh, there's the top three. Okay. I already know what happens.
Yeah, Instagram is
Yeah.
off limits.
Yeah.
Facebook's okay. Twitter is questionable.
Right.
If you're in the
Right.
middle of a Formula One race, Instagram is off
You
limits.
can't. Yeah. You
Cannot.
cannot get into it.
Cannot.
Even TikTok, every once in a while, something will pop up on TikTok. But Instagram, I can't pull up while I'm watching the
Yep.
watching the Grand
Absolutely
Prix.
not.
But it's become
Absolutely
a
not.
tradition now on Sundays, typically Sunday mornings. But I'll get up, I'll make some bacon, I'll make some coffee, and I'm upstairs. And there's a reason I bought a big TV with a big subwoofer, and it's primarily for F1,
Oh
so that I
man.
can watch that. We were looking at tickets recently for the Las Vegas Grand Prix, and I mean several thousands of dollars
Yeah.
just to go watch that. And I thought, how cool would that be? But then I thought, wait a minute. I'm sitting here in the comfort of my own home with this TV where I can see the entire race. I can get the commentary. I can make my own espresso. I can make my own bacon. I can sit here and just enjoy it. And it is loud. I mean, it is super loud throughout my
Yeah.
whole house. Uh, I don't know. I'll probably travel at some point to go watch one of the Grand Prix. I think I'd
So
love to travel to the Temple of Speed. I got to go
that
watch
would be
Monza,
amazing. That would be
right?
amazing to see a race in Europe at Belgium Spa, Belgium, or Monza would be amazing in Italy.
Yeah.
And I guess the feedback that I've heard is very similar to say football. So I went to my first football game in several
Mhm.
years. You know that football was a huge part of my life before the pandemic. I would try to
Right.
make every
Right.
single University of Utah football game. Interest kind of fell away during the pandemic, and I
Mhm.
just never really came back. But I went to a game, and it's fun. Like you're there, you're with the audience and everybody in the stadium, and man, I was sitting by the smartest people that every play they were like, oh, they shouldn't have run. I knew they shouldn't have run the ball. I should have passed the ball. Like,
Yeah.
well, go
Yeah.
tell the coach then if you're so smart. Like,
Right.
go down there and
Right.
tell him. And it's fun because it's the energy and the loudness and all that stuff. But also, you have no idea what the hell is going on. You just like see the players running around, and you don't know who's where and what's going on. And so they kind of
Yeah.
say the same
Yeah.
thing about a Formula One race. Like you see the cars, and it's amazing to see how big they are and powerful they are, and how the suction just sucks them down to the ground, and they can turn at those ungodly speeds. But you have no idea what's going on. And the commentators for Formula One are absolutely incredible. You can
Mhm.
watch the race from any of their points of views and hear their communication back and forth with their team. So yeah, I'm kind of the same. Like you and I need to travel to one of these
Yeah.
days, but that would
Yeah.
probably be like a one and done kind of thing. Your setup sounds pretty cool.
I think we do need to do. We got to go. We got to hit Monza.
That'd
The
be
other one I
awesome.
thought would be kind of cool is going to Austria, just because it's a gorgeous country and the views from the racetrack look amazing. But Monza. So I have two places that I want to travel relative to speed, and Monza's one. But then I want to go when they do 24-hour of Le Mans. I want to
Oh,
go over to France. I want to go to the whole festival that they've got. Be there for the race. Just feel that. See what I mean. That is the legacy with that race is unbelievable. I went probably about an hour and a half just deep into video after video after video over the weekend, watching old races of 24-hour of Le Mans.
wow.
So those are two trips. I've told my wife, I'm like, either I'm doing that with some friends or you and I are doing that or both. Like we're bringing people,
Amazing.
we're going to go do Le Mans. We're going to go do Monza. We got to go do that stuff. So you're going to turn into a race car driver now, right?
I'm still very slow. Let me just tell you that.
You used to race bikes.
Yeah,
You used to do
yeah.
crit series. So you were pretty fast on a track.
Used to is the keyword there.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of things change as we get it,
I've
as
got to
we
go to
age.
work on Monday morning. You know what I mean?
Right. So the podcast seems to really be doing well. How many episodes have you released at this point?
Oh, geez. Without looking, probably around 530 or something. Yeah, it's been quite a bit. It's not really on purpose. We just like when I started, I was having so much fun with it and having more people to interview. And, I just kind of got in a flow and we started releasing Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And we just kind of have held that kind of flow. So, if you do releases 3 days a week and sometimes four, then all of a sudden, after a few years, you end up with a lot of episodes and a lot of downloads. So,
Yeah.
really grateful and fortunate that, yeah, I've been able to go on that journey. As you well know, like podcasting, it's a ton of work. It costs us money. Like we don't make
Yep.
any money off of
Yep.
it. Like we maybe can meet some cool people and do some sessions that way. And, that's something, but it definitely doesn't pay for the podcast. But the experience of having conversations with people, like listening to your last episode with you and Miles talk about tribes, it's wonderful. And that is kept. You know what I mean? Like it's a conversation
Right.
that you guys had could have just been the two of you having that conversation, but you pressed record, and now that's something I get to listen to and hear my two friends talking about tribes, and it's really cool. It's something that's very meaningful, and you get to meet tons of people, and yeah, it's been a really fun journey.
So I remember we were at Sunset Coffee in, was it 2020, right? 2020 when you
Yeah, probably would
before
have
we
been.
started this, we're sitting at Sunset Coffee. We're just bouncing ideas back and forth. And we had both come to the conclusion that we were going to do podcasts. And I don't know if you had already made the Boundless Body logo and done all of that stuff yet. Um, but I remember sitting there, we're talking about this, and now here we are in 2023, and you've dropped over 500 episodes. You've obviously gone at a faster pace. I think that we're sitting just over 150 episodes,
Amazing.
200 roughly with some of our shorts that we have released here and there, but 150 episodes, as we'll call it. You've really had a great pace. Talk a little bit about what are some of the things that you have learned through this whole process of learning from other experts?
That's a huge question. Boy, I guess one of the biggest things I would say is to really shut up and kind of listen more. Um, we tried to have a really good kind of mix of, world renowned experts, people that anybody in our field would really know, authors, researchers, scientists, doctors, that kind of thing. We like highlighting them, but I've also really loved highlighting people that wouldn't necessarily be in the limelight, people that are doing really, really good work in their own little corner of the globe. Um, I think back on our time at Lifetime Fitness, where we were working at the time. Um, and, I feel like we were, both doing pretty good work. And I never felt like very much like recognized for that. And
Right.
and I think
Right.
like I would love to give a platform for other people who are kind of in that space that they know they're never going to break out and be, a huge star or have tons of followers or, make a business, whatever, but they're doing really good work. And so to be able to host both and then to learn to listen to what they have to say. And, I used to make my questions ahead of time, and I wouldn't always use them, but I'd always have like at least an outline or potential questions. And I still do tons of research before I do every episode. It's several hours that I do on each person. I want to hear them on other shows and really understand their content and try to unlock something that nobody else has unlocked from them with
Mhm.
how I ask my questions. But I don't also have a list of questions anymore. I've got an idea of where I want the conversation to go, but more than that, to be able to just kind of listen and let the conversation play out a little bit has been something I guess I've kind of done. I don't know if better is the right word, but differently in the last few years that I've done the show.
You've always been a great conversationalist. When you talk about listening, what shifted for you?
Well, I mean, I guess it's always something that's been somewhat in my consciousness, like reading, when I was pretty young, reading the book How to Win Friends and Influence People really talks
Mm.
about like to be a great conversationalist, all you have to do is like ask questions and don't talk about yourself as much. And so that was part of it. I don't think I was necessarily very good at doing that. And maybe another part of it is being a personal trainer. I've trained for almost 17 years now, and like understanding that people don't necessarily care that much about what you did and what's going on in your life. I'm here to, give you exercises, count to 12 poorly, do your program design, try to get you to your goals, that kind of thing. But also like I genuinely want to be interested in my clients. What did you do this weekend? How are your kids doing? Um, that kind of thing. And so I think that helps as well. But I guess with the podcast journey, um, learning how to be I'm not very good at learning how to be a little bit more economical with my words and really hitting the mute button on myself more than I used to, I think has been really helpful. As far as like a general concept, that's probably one of the biggest things I've learned.
Any creative project pushes us. It causes us to open ourselves up to areas that we maybe weren't aware of. Some things we find along the way. I remember one time you told me about how you went back and looked at podcasts that you had done, and you said, I counted, and I can't remember what the number was, but how many times you had said and you were so pissed off about it. You've been criticized at times about your voice. And you have a great response to it. Talk about that.
Thanks. Yeah. So I'm already very self-conscious of my voice. I don't know what it is. I just don't like it. I think most people don't really like the sound of their own voice. I've never liked mine. You've got such a great voice for radio. You also have a face for TV, so that's a good thing.
Thank you.
Exactly. You. Yeah. Didn't want to get them.
Larry Gelwig used to always tell me I had a face for radio too.
My dad has a face for radio. We'll throw him under the bus.
Good. Wes has got the face for TV. That's why he's been so successful.
Yeah, same station for like 38 years, man.
Yeah.
What was the question?
You respond well to the criticisms.
So yeah, I mean, we don't take things personal, right? You should never take things personal. That said, like sometimes people say things that they're not really necessary. Like we have so many positive reviews on our show, and there's one-star review of our podcast that said the guests are awesome, the content is great, but the voice of the host sucks, or something like that. And I was like, why isn't that worth like a 3-star? That could be at least like in the middle. Like
drop you down one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Give the guests a little bit of props. So yeah, I mean, I've done things like I started working with an audio engineer. Actually, somebody reached out to me about a year ago and started to introduce me to all kinds of different settings on the podcast mixer that both of us use, which if you go into the settings, there's tons of different things that you can change and control. And I started messing with that. I tried making my voice, maybe deeper, or I've tried to slow down a little bit in my speak. I just naturally talk fast. I get really excited about stuff and I say a lot of words. And, it just came to some point. I just made the decision, like, what am I doing? Like, not only am I obsessing about the sound quality that maybe some people care about, maybe they don't, I don't know, but it's not making me happy. And at the end of the day, this is my show. So I guess if people say anything, I just, try to respond the best that I can and just know that's, maybe it hurts my feelings or doesn't. I try not to make it personal, but if it does, I don't know. I just try not to worry about it too much.
Why do you think people say stuff like that?
I don't know. That's a great question. I mean, you and I know, as you kind of teed this up, that I'm, primarily in the carnivore space. I've been in the low carbohydrate space for a long time. I started a carnivore diet in 2019, and I've done it ever since. So it's been almost 5 years, and I would not even dream of spending 10 seconds of my life going to some vegan to tell them that they're stupid or they're wrong or they've got the stats wrong on the environment or they don't know anything about ethics and they don't know anything about nutrition. Like I would never take any time out of my day to criticize anybody else. If that's what somebody wants to do, if that's something that somebody wants to do, that's great. And so I don't understand why people would go out and criticize other people for certain things. If you don't like it, like you don't have to listen. This is free. Like you don't have to listen to it. So, I don't know. It's not really something that I really understand or put a ton of energy into. And so if people want to say stuff, that's fine. And it is the rare, I mean, it's more rare than it is common. But yeah, for the people that do it, I don't know. It's not really in my energy. It's not something I really like try to worry about.
Well, things to do. I think that I appreciate and I enjoy. First, you'll recognize and you'll say, hey, I don't like my voice that much either. And I think that owning it, we all have things that people could look at and say, oh, hey, this is wrong about you, right? From their perspective, or I don't like this. And great. Okay. I don't like that about myself either, but I can't change it. And so I think that's a great way to own it. The other piece is just saying, all right, I'm going to take it. That's probably coming from a point of pain, and I wouldn't do that, but I'm going to move on. And I don't think enough people do that in today's day and age. I mean, these people who make a comment like that, how sad do they have to be to worry about something that bad? Or I mean, that nominal. It's just, it's not, who cares?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And the last one was so good. I posted on social media. I loved
That's
it.
the one I'm referring to.
Yeah,
The
exactly.
most. Yeah.
Called me insipid, which I'm still not fully 100% sure I know the definition. And then said,
Send you a dictionary.
yeah, please. I appreciate that. And then said, like, Dr. Chafee, my guest, like, really needs to be more choosy about which shows he decides to be on. So part of my response was like, yeah, I'll let him know. So I did. I messaged him. I'm like, hey, man, you really need to be a little bit more considerate when you're appearing on podcasts. Don't be on mine anymore. And we had a good chuckle over that.
I don't be on the show of a guy who's really smart, but you might not like his voice, or Joe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 from Michigan doesn't like your voice. So don't be on the Casey show because of that. Yeah.
There you go. I might not be reaching out to invite him anytime soon.
Probably not. You have really focused in on this low carb and high protein space for quite some time, which about 500 plus episodes in, I mean, you've got to consider yourself somewhat of an expert or an authority because of these conversations that you've had, but also you've worked with a lot of clients. How do you continue to push yourself to learn more?
Yeah, that's a great question. I tend to be a little bit more, I don't know, not think of myself as an expert really in anything. My wife and I were talking yesterday. She's doing a cadaver course. So it's her second annual cadaver course that she's done with Tom Myers, who wrote Anatomy Trains, and they're dissecting live bodies. And she was just saying over the phone, like, we're cutting these people up and I'm talking to all these other people and they know so much more than I do. I'm like the stupidest person in the room. And it's like that. I told her, like, that's how it is when you're learning more. You realize you know less and less and less about something the more you go. Like the saying goes, the further away from the shore you get, the deeper the water is.
Right.
And so I always think there's something to learn and unlearn and redo and perfect in some kind of different way. It's a field that's really exciting to me right off the bat. So you and I have talked about, like, when we were doing homebrewing, you and I learned how to do homebrewing together. It's not really something we stuck with or anything, but it was interesting because, in high school, I didn't care about chemistry. I didn't care about temperature conversions, Celsius to Fahrenheit. I didn't care about, machining equipment or problem solving, but homebrewing kind of teaches you that same kind of stuff. And now all of a sudden you do care about chemistry and you care about the temperatures and all these other things and all the effects. Same with Formula One. Like, I didn't care about aerodynamics, and now I'm learning aerodynamic principles that I never would have cared about in high school, that, oh, this is why the car is 3/10 faster than that other car, because it's got this effect and they added this little tiny little flap. And so I don't know, like, it's easy for me to want to learn about things that I'm interested in. And the world of low carbohydrate nutrition, it's just got so many things to be interested in. Do you want to talk about our evolution? Do you want to talk about our biology? Do you want to talk about, the history of things and how food companies came to be and what the medical system is doing, how health insurance works? Like, you can jump in and so many different places that makes it very interesting. And again, I think part of it is learning, and other parts of it is unlearning. Like the things I thought about low carbohydrate diets several years ago, I've had to like rethink and like, wow, maybe it's not the very best thing for everybody. Maybe women do need a carb cycle. Maybe certain men in certain situations need to worry about other things, or they should have fruit or whatever. Like, there's so many nuances. In my opinion, it keeps it really interesting, and it's a fun space because there's always somebody kind of coming in and has their own little angle with things. And the podcast gives me a good opportunity to talk about those things and learn about those things as well. It's pretty cool.
I like how you Bethany said that she feels like that she's not the smartest in the room. And I've always thought that as soon as you feel like you're the smartest in the room, you're in the wrong room, because you're not going to grow in there.
Yeah.
Now, you could be giving to other people, but there's no growth in that room, whatever the room is. And so one of the things that I have constantly pushed myself on is saying, okay, who can I learn from? If I feel like I'm the smartest in the room, then I'm in the wrong space. I need to find a better tribe. I need to find a tribe that is not looking up to me, but that I can look up to and push myself a little bit further. You've had some world-renowned guests on your show, best-selling authors, experts throughout the field, nutritionists, dietitians, researchers, you name it. Recently, with this large episode that you pulled together, You pulled a lot of information that directly debunked the concept that's being put out there with the blue zones. For listeners who haven't heard of what a blue zone is, can you give a breakdown?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, made popular by this recent documentary, Live to 100, done by Dan Buettner and put on by Netflix. So the original story, as I understand it, is that two demographers, I can't remember their name, they were curious about why it seemed like there were areas in the world that had a certain population of older people. For whatever reason, it was more than normal centenarians, octogenarians, people that lived quite a long time, and also seemed to be very happy. And so they studied a few areas and identified four different places in the world where this seemed to occur. So those four places are in Okinawa, Japan, in Sardinia, in Nicoya, I believe is Costa Rica, and then there's one more in Greece. And they identified that these areas have, again, a greater propensity of people that age and age well. And the legend goes that they were circling these areas with a blue pen, hence they became the blue zones. And they were, again, kind of curious about what kind of lifestyle traits these people had. How did they live? Who did they live with? What was their life like? Did they exercise? Did they eat a certain way? Did they drink? Did they smoke? Like all kinds of different things. And so they attempted to kind of study this. And that was all fine and good until 2005, when the National Geographic wanted to get involved, and Dan Buettner is one of their authors. He's written about lots of different things, and he got involved with the Blue Zones Project and wanted to do a story about it. But to be able to sell the concept to Americans, we needed to identify a quote unquote blue zone here in the United States. And so they did do that. They identified Loma Linda in California as the fifth blue zone. And so for many years, there's been those five blue zones. And yeah, it's been this concept of understanding what people do to live a very long time. And it's also been a really nice platform to write a bunch of like best-selling books, which has been done by Dan Buettner, talking about all kinds of things. And in particular, talking about diet has been, I would say, like a disproportional area of their focus. And we can talk about why that is. But they've kind of had this idea that people in these areas eat a primarily plant-based diet. And because of the way these people live, the recommendation from Dan Buettner specifically is that we should all be adhering to a 90 to 98% plant-based diet. And so again, like you're looking at these people, they're happy, they're dancing, they always live with family. Most of these areas are on hills, so they're climbing up and down. There's purpose and meaning, and the grandmas still make lunch for the family, and they still take care of the grandkids, and like they do all these other things. But yet, like I said, in any interview that you hear Dan Buettner do, when he's asked like, "What's the most important thing? What's the top thing? If you could choose from the 9 pillars that he has, the number one thing he always says is you should be eating a primarily plant-based diet that consists of 90 to 98% plants." And so it's just it's very curious.
Where did that particular recommendation come from? Because the researchers did not find that that not over 90% plant-based diet was consistent across the blue zones.
No, they didn't. And the way they collected their data was, I mean, it was just all over the place. Like a lot of the data they used in Japan was taken from a 1950 food survey where Japan has just been obliterated by a war, and they found that they are eating sweet potatoes. And in one of the episodes about Okinawa, I believe it was the first episode of Live to 100, the woman in there literally says like sweet potatoes are amazing because they're survival food. They are survival food. They're not the food you eat to thrive. It's how you get through a tough time.
Right.
And so again, the way they collected the data is really, really interesting. But with Dan Buettner identifying the fifth blue zone as Loma Linda, basically Loma Linda is very different than the other four blue zones that were first identified, because the first four, at least in the populations they were looking at, people are born in the same area. They live in the same area. They die in the same area. They don't go out. All the same people know each other. They're friends for ages and ages. They live with a family, all those other traits that we talked about. Loma Linda is basically, if you want to think of it as like a retirement community for the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And this is where things start to get a little bit interesting. The Seventh-day Adventist Church was created by Ellen G. White. It was on the heels of the Millerite movement. I'm not sure if you're much familiar with that.
Yep.
So are you familiar with kooky religions that came out of the 1800s?
Several.
You do? Okay. Anyway, so yeah, the Millerites believed that the world was going to end to the extent that they like sold their possessions, went to a certain area, waited for the specific day. It didn't come. They called it the Great Disappointment, something like that. And out of that offsprung all kinds of other religions. And one of them was started by Ellen G. White. As a young girl, she had a concussion and probably had seizures. Was maybe in a coma for a while. Not exactly sure on that, but started having visions from God and started to create this church. And one of the visions that she had was that it was very much based in like carnal sin, basically. Any kind of sexual acts, that kind of thing, were very much looked down upon. And thus they identified that, eating meat the way that we had always done creates healthy hormones and creates sexual drive, which it very well should. And they were abhorrent to that. And so part of her revelations was that a plant leaning diet would be the best way to go. Now, it's important to say that it was never recommended to be a vegan diet because a vegan diet literally is lethal. Like, you can't live on a vegan diet. You have to supplement with something. And so, they would eat, from my understanding, eggs and dairy and that kind of thing that only later became kind of perverted over to like an only plants diet, or that's at least the language that people hear.
Yeah.
And so now you have this religious influence that's coming into this message about what these people eat in the blue zones. And so you might be thinking as a listener, like, what the hell do I care about a religion and revelations that were had, 150 years ago? I don't care about that. Like, I can eat whatever I want. It's not a big deal. But you don't understand like the implications of the Seventh-day Adventist Church saying that Jesus literally would not come back until enough people had converted to their religion and their way of eating in particular. They were the ones who started preaching about nutrition. They were the ones that started the dietetic school, the American dietetic school, for over a century. It's Seventh-day Adventist. It all comes with that background. And when they're influencing all the nutrition guidelines, all the nutrition textbooks, literally the nutrition school in Loma Linda, and then infiltrates governments and government recommendations, and that is allowed to continue for over 100 years, like that has a huge, massive impact. Even today, even though it's just a small religion, they don't have many people. I don't know hardly any members of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, but it's that impact that they had because they were kind of first to the message that the plant-based diet would help Jesus come back and redeem the earth, basically.
A lot of it had to do with trying to get men to stop masturbating too, right?
Yeah. So again, being so much against carnal sin, that was one of the worst things you could do. And as interesting as Ellen G. White's writings were about the topic, it really was the writings of John Harvey Kellogg that took it like kind of the next step. So if you're curious about that name, yes, you recognize Kellogg. And his family was part of that Millerite movement, and so much so that his family never sent him to school, really. They pulled him out of school because it's like, well, Jesus is coming back anyway, so you don't need to go to school. You're going to be fine. So they pulled him out of school. He needed a job eventually and got a job doing all the writing for Ellen G. White's visions. And so he would typescript all the stuff that she would say and transcribe it all. And obviously, as a 12-year-old, you're going to be heavily influenced by whatever is going on. And so as he grew up, they eventually sent him to a medical university. He did become a doctor eventually. He created the sanitariums, which are basically anything you think of that you see in a normal modern day hospital kind of had its beginnings in a sanitarium, bring all kind of people and specialities in one area, wearing a white lab coat, like all of that stuff was kind of created by John Harvey Kellogg. And as part of their mission, they really, wrote quite aggressively against masturbation, said it was pretty much like the worst thing you can do. And as part of that, he wanted to invent some kind of food that would be bland that kids could eat that would quell their natural desires to touch themselves, essentially, and masturbate. And so eventually he came up with cold cereal, which was cornflakes. The company was eventually taken over by his brother. They kind of fought over whether the cereal should have sugar or not. And eventually Sugar Cereal won the day with his brother taking over the company. This was in Battle Creek, Michigan. And so again, that's an area that Post cereal comes from, and Graham from Graham Cracker comes from. Like there's a huge hotbed because that's where the inventors were mostly like concentrated in at the time. And so that's where cold cereal comes from. Like when you ask somebody on the street, like, did you know that cold cereal came from a doctor who wanted to prevent masturbation? People like, what in the hell are you talking about? Like, what? It's a crazy story, but that's how it came to be.
It was common back in those days for religions to not only make big claims, but to also make claims of here is specifically what God told me to do for this religion. And as a big part of that, there were dietary restrictions. There were dietary recommendations. The temperance movement, if our listeners have not studied that, the temperance movement was a big part of that time as well, telling people what to eat, what to drink, how to do those things to get closer to God. It's fascinating to think about the power that this movement has had. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day, right?
It's a great slogan if you're a cereal company, right? I mean, you and I are very familiar with the Mormon religion. We both grew up in the Mormon church.
Right.
And, yeah, in the LDS church, the Mormon church, we have what's called the Word of Wisdom, which is, again, another set of rules all about religion. And I mean, it says a whole lot of things, and people focus on the one thing it says, which the foods of the earth. Like it almost sounds like fruits and vegetables are the greatest things that you could be eating, and that needs to be a center part of your diet. But people don't realize, like back in the 1830s, whenever he had that vision, like people were not eating fruits and vegetables. Like you could get candida very easily. Fruits and vegetables were not available 365 days out of the year. When you got them, it was a treat. They didn't look anything like they do today. Most vegetables that you see in a store would be completely unrecognizable back then. Those are things that we've been able to breed differently. Same with fruits. You get these giant softball-sized apples at the store.
Right.
That's not how apples look. And just thinking logically about places they lived in, like Ohio and Illinois, like you would not have access to fruit. You didn't have a semi truck, moving fruit from a port that came up from South America to bring you mangoes to enjoy in February. You know what I mean? There would have been a time where all that stuff would have been limited, but everybody gets so fixated on the one thing, which is like the fruits and vegetables are like the best part of the diet. And yeah, so it's really interesting how those messages kind of get twisted up.
So I'm not opposed to people having faith and belief and religion and spiritual ideas at all. There's science that we can't ignore. And when we're talking about nutrition, we're talking about science. We probably should follow the science. When we're talking about things of the heart, then maybe we should be following some sort of faith-based concept, right? They're two totally separate things. They shouldn't be put together, right? In fact, James P. Carse in his book, well, now I'm blanking on the name. It'll come back to me. But he talks about the concept of science and religion, the crossover, the fight over it. And he references back to Galileo. And when Galileo observed the movements of the stars and how that created this massive conflict between him and the Pope at the time, to the point where they basically said, renounce everything that you have said or you're going to be killed. And so he did. He renounced it. He said that he was heretical and that, he basically just lived the rest of his 10, 12 years of his life in isolation, in, exile, as he called it. So it's not that people shouldn't, at least from my perspective, have some sort of faith or some sort of belief. But when it comes to nutrition and nutrition science and our bodies, it just seems to make sense that we should learn the basic nutrition science. Yeah. Breakfast is not necessarily the most important meal of the day. In fact, many people do much better without eating a breakfast. What are some of the things that our listeners may not know about the Blue Zones?
Well, you have to be really careful on that note. And I'll just give a quick example. Recently, this has been asked for a very long time. The people in the carnivore space, we do care about the science. And I've noticed that on, the people that are eating a carnivorous diet, for example, which is the way I define it is at least 75% of your calories coming from animal products. So it doesn't mean you're only eating animal products. You can eat other things if you like, but eating a carnivore diet basically flies in the face of anything anybody's been told about nutrition for the last 100, 150 years. So it's a big deal. And people in the space are curious about it. We want to know, cholesterol, is cholesterol going to kill me? Like my wife has an LDL cholesterol of over 200. That is double what it should be. Like,
Right.
don't you
Right.
think that scares the shit out of me to like want to know and learn? Like, is this harmful? She seems metabolically healthy. She's 30 years old and her other markers look fantastic. So if bad cholesterol is bad and causes heart disease, that's a huge thing. So we want answers to those questions. And so again, in this space, what we have wanted is some type of a debate, a friendly, respectful debate. If we could get some plant-based people on the stage, if we can get some animal-based people on the stage, share their opinions, talk about some different things, let's talk about the science. People in the carnivore space really just want some justification for what some of the people in the plant-based space are saying. How are you justifying the fact that are these things healthy? Are they maybe they may not be. We want to know, what's your opinion? We would love to just hear. It's not that we want to like argue with you. We just want to know the justification. And the thing that happens is exactly kind of what you mentioned, where there's a scientific way to say something like, we think this, we have an idea of this study says this, it doesn't say this, we have to be careful about this, we know this from evolution, this has been studied, whatever. People that talk in that way do so in a very careful and scientific way. And people in the plant-based space, it seems to be a little bit more of that religious thing. And we did have a debate several months ago. It was in England that it happened, that we had some plant-based people with some carnivore-based people, and it's exactly how it went. Like, from the carnivore perspective, it was very scientific and to the point. And from the plant-based perspective, it was like, everybody knows that vegetables are good for you, or experts agree that fruits and vegetables are better for you. Like, that's not necessarily science, it's people's opinion. And they had used a plant-based diet to help their kids or whatever, and they were very emotional about it, and that's great, that's awesome. But it's very different when you're talking the science of things, like you said. And in all fairness, nutrition science is incredibly difficult to do. Like, the way we need to learn things about food is basically, you have to do what is called a randomized controlled trial. So basically, when you're testing drugs, you have two groups. You assume they're big enough to have an impact, and you assume also that you've controlled for all the variables, meaning everything is the same between these two groups. It's just that one group is getting the actual pill, and then the second group is getting placebo. And let's see what happens, however long you need to follow them to see what the effect is. And if you get a big enough sample size to say that, like, wow, like 50% of the people in the pill group got an improvement over the people that got the placebo, that's some pretty strong evidence. And now you can move forward with doing your pill. So to think we could do the same thing with nutrition is really difficult. Like, what are you going to do? Lock up like 1,000 people, 10,000 people in separate metabolic wards and only feed them the same things, all day, every day for many years? That's just really tough to do. The closest thing we've ever been able to do that was called the Minnesota coronary trial, which was done in the 1970s, which was in mental hospitals. And so they could control meticulously what people ate in the hospital. And like, one group got plant-based type butter and margarine and that kind of thing, and the other group got the normal kind of saturated fat. And they were able to follow these people for 7 years. And not only did it not show that the plant-based stuff and the vegetable oils were better for people, they actually had worse outcomes than the people that were just eating the saturated fat. But rather than publish the data immediately, they sat on it for, I believe, 16 years before it came out in some very obscure journal somewhere. And it wasn't until the last like 6-7 years that a reporter discovered it and was like, where is all this data from this study that was supposedly done? And they found it in the basement of the dude's home in Minnesota. The son had to travel for several weekends digging around the house trying to find all this data, and they found it. Like, proved that an animal-based diet with saturated fat was better for people than the plant-based, but they didn't want to talk about it, so the data never got really released and talked about. So it's that kind of thing. People need to be very careful when they're listening to ideas that come out in shows like Live to 100, where there's not conclusive evidence of anything, yet they're saying this thing, or there's a headline that says keto is going to kill people. And when you look at the numbers in the study, it's ridiculous and not peer reviewed and has nothing to do with those randomized controlled trials. It has to do with like food surveys that are horribly inaccurate. And it's just, it sucks because people don't know how to comb through studies and how to learn about that stuff. It takes time to understand what hazard ratios are and what p-values are and what epidemiology is compared to that randomized controlled trial like I talked about. And we allow expert opinion to tell us how to live our life. It's like Lewis Hamilton he eats a vegan diet. And so we think, wow, he's so good at racing cars and he eats vegan. I should eat vegan too. And if he does it for planetary health, like if he saved one of his flights to a fashion show on a private jet, that would do more for the planet than eating a plant-based diet. It's
Right.
just,
Right.
it's tough because people are pushing an agenda. A plant-based diet is very high in processed foods, and food manufacturers make tons of money when we eat a plant-based diet. And it's fair to say we are already eating a plant-based diet in America and across the world. We are plant-based. It already is. And plant-based just means that all our food is coming from corn and soy and wheat and processed foods. So yeah, it's hard because the science is very different than expert opinion or anecdote. You know what I mean? Like stories. There's agendas that people need to understand.
Who was it that was on one of your podcasts, and you referenced this in your episode on the Blue Zones, that said what you just said, that we are primarily on a plant-based diet right now?
I can't remember who it was. It could have been James Connolly. He's a food writer. We took a segment of his chat and put that in that episode. And then I also did another episode with him, primarily talking about this documentary. So it could have been him. He's very, very smart with diets and how we eat. And it was actually pointed out to me in the last metabolic conference that I went to. Somebody was on stage and said that. And I was like, holy shit, like I'd never thought of it in that light. That's absolutely right. We are eating plant-based. We're eating tons more plants. We are animals. So
you've looked at a lot of logs from clients over the years, right?
Say that again.
You've looked at a lot of logs from clients over the years.
Yeah.
You've seen a lot of people, what they're eating. I have too. And what you said, I would say I back that up 100% when someone comes to me and they say, this is what I'm eating. The majority of their calories come from a plant-based source, whether it's bread, whether it's pasta, whether popcorn, it doesn't matter. Very, very few people are getting food from meat, from a carnivore type space. And so we've already done this plant-based, or over 70% plant-based. Let's look at the statistics. How are we doing? Well, probably at this point, one of the most recent statistics that I saw was that over 70% of men in America are obese. Now, we've talked about like over 70% of people in America are overweight and or obese, but over 70% of men in America are obese. If you're not obese, you're in the minority.
Yeah.
If you are fit, you are in the extreme minority. If you are lean, you are in the top 1%.
It's crazy.
We've done this plant-based thing, and don't get me wrong. I love Arnold. I'll always be a fan of Arnold. But when I watched Game Changers, and he talks about how he's eating more plant-based, and I'm like, wait a minute. I just read your article a week ago where you showed in your, it was in like Men's Health magazine or something like that. And then he did a video follow-up. He's like, come on, guys, let me show you what's in here. Here's my eggs, and this is the steak that I eat. And you got to drink, okay, I don't drink the milk. Like I said, in Pumping Iron, you drink beer, but I actually do drink the milk. And so he goes through in this video talking about all the things that he's eating. And it's, he's got meat in his diet, and he's got, but then on Game Changers, he said that he's eating primarily vegetarian and vegan. I'm like, oh, come on, man. Don't sell out for something like that.
It was a massive bowl of eggs in the fridge too.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, Game Changers was
awful.
Game Changers was awful. It was super well done, put on by James Cameron, who owns stake in Verdient Health, which is a pea protein company. A lot of the people, investors in that, including Lewis Hamilton.
James Cameron. Okay, so that's why he did it.
Yeah. It's
made a shit ton of money from Cameron.
It's a great advertisement. Yeah. It's a really good advertisement for plant-based diets. I do have the list somewhere of people that appeared in Game Changers, and it shows their status now. Like these are all the people that got injured. These are all the people that retired. These are all the people that had to go off the diet. It's pretty astounding, but it's almost like Cowspiracy. Like Cowspiracy came out maybe like 2014 and used very erroneous numbers to say that cows were harming the planet and were contributing 51% of greenhouse gases to our atmosphere, which
from belching and farting.
Like, think about that. Like, really, like some common sense, 51%, really?
Right.
And so the facts were brought to them, and they eventually had to walk them back, and they brought the numbers down, which is still incredibly high, to like 14%, which is not true. But it's not like they throw a parade and tell everybody that. People
No.
still watch Cowspiracy with the old numbers, and they're wrong. And so they go around thinking that cows are ruining the planet when they're absolutely not. They're building up topsoil and sequestering carbon, and they're doing tons of amazing things for the planet. We've always had ruminant animals for millions of years. You think all of a sudden it's cows that are ruining the planet? Give me a break. So stupid.
It makes no sense. Now, the interesting thing is I've met vegetarians and vegans over my lifetime. There's really only one vegan that I ever liked, but that's just because we had a good friendship, and he was I'd interact with him, and then he would disappear for months at a time. And I really liked him. But a lot of other people didn't like him because, much like many other vegetarians and vegans, they're not stable. You do that long enough and you are not healthy. You are not physically healthy. You are not mentally healthy. We are not designed to live on a plant diet. We are not designed to live off of plants. We're not designed to be able to function on that. There are so many things out there that show this. I mean, I joke all the time. I'm a big fan of that show, Alone. I don't know if you've ever watched that.
Yeah.
And where they go drop people off in the middle of nowhere, and they have to be by themselves alone. And then it's whoever lasts the longest. You watch what happens if there are people who can't get meat, can't get fish. They whittle down to nothing in a month and a half, just by eating figs and berries and whatever, plant-based. You can't live on that. And that show in and of itself, but we have convinced people that this is the way to go. This is the kind way of living. I'm telling you, kindness, no, it's absolutely not kind. It's not kind to you. It's not kind to the planet. Life eats life. If you think that not eating an animal is kind, it's ridiculous. You're delusional. You are absolutely delusional if you think that somehow it's kind. The lion that kills the gazelle to eat the gazelle is not mean. He's living. That's it. Life eats life. And then what happens is then that gazelle goes through the digestive system, gets pooped out. Then that creates the life that grows up into the grass that feeds the gazelles later on. Life eats life. It's ridiculous. So again, I've met a lot of vegans and vegetarians in my day. Most of them got there because of propaganda. Most of them read something, heard something, and they went on the propaganda. I have never met a person that went on keto or carnivore or any of the iterations of any type of low carb, high protein diet that got there because of propaganda.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's different. And recently I joined a book club. I don't know if they read as much as you and I, Miles, did in our book club. Like often
we were way more funny too.
Half joke that it was a wine club with a book problem.
Yeah.
I was thinking
I'd look over, I'm like, Miles, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing?
You guys are talking about Zen and the art of
hey.
Totally.
Hey, I'm having a good time over here.
You guys are talking about Zen and the art of motorcycle maintenance, and this feels a bit like telling your third grade teacher that you didn't actually do the homework, but I actually never read the book.
But you really got into Tao of Pooh.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. Less words, easier words to understand.
Pictures.
Exactly. But I'm in a book club, and it's put on by Dr. Anthony Chafee, who's a carnivore out of Perth, Australia. Really amazing guy. Got to meet and hang out with him a few times. He's awesome. And the group of the people that meet up for the book club, they're just everyday people. They're from all over the world. They're seeking knowledge and understanding, and they're learning from these books. And the person that puts on the book club is really intelligent, was doing this for a really long time. Most of the books that they talk about are books that I have read in my life and I'm very familiar with. I've probably hosted a great majority of them on the show anyway. But you get this real sense of like, these everyday people are not here. They're not here for the fuck of it. They're not here
right.
Because they thought it would be way fun to just eat meat and fly in the face of convention. These people have suffered greatly with something. People with bipolar, maybe digestive issues, skin issues, mental disorders, schizophrenia, bipolar, like crazy things that people have suffered with. And they have found something after suffering for so long that can actually help them, and they feel really good. And now they're just seeking the truth. And like, okay, like one of my good friends, Robin, I met her in Texas. I actually met her in Denver when I did low carb Denver. And she is the type of person that's very similar to my wife. When she eats a low carbohydrate diet, her cholesterol goes really, really, really high, especially her LDL, or what we consider quote unquote bad cholesterol, goes really,
Yeah.
really high.
My wife's the
But
same way.
okay, so there you go. That is in a category of people that we call lean mass hyper responders. If you are a lean person and you eat a low carbohydrate diet, your cholesterol very likely can go really, really high. And so studies are going on right now that are absolutely fascinating, by the way, where we're looking at these people to see like, okay, they've got really high cholesterol. Is this actually cause for concern, or is this just a byproduct of a different way that the body is using energy and trafficking cholesterol and fat through the body? So the way to alleviate that, and really easy way to do that, is you introduce a small amount of carbohydrates back in the diet, and the LDL cholesterol will go right back down to where it needs to be. It's amazing that the system is so dynamic. You can get, I could get your LDL cholesterol to either go up by double or drop by double in a few days. If you ever had like a cholesterol test, I could help you know what to do to be able to make your doctor happy, essentially. But the catch is, with my friend Robin, if she reintroduces carbohydrate, she gets bipolar symptoms. So
Hmm.
what
Interesting.
that's uncomfortable, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's not a fun
Yeah.
decision. Do I want my LDL cholesterol to be in an area that my doctor says is problematic and is going to kill me of a heart disease? Or like, am I willing to be bipolar again and have terrible symptoms and be, hard on my kids and my husband? Like, that's a tough problem to have. And so again, like, what I see in the carnivore world is not necessarily dogma. People want answers. They're just seeking questions. And the people that turn around and want to share their message, they're trying to help other people to see the same thing as well. And we're not saying that this is the only thing everybody needs to do forever. Like, we want answers, and we want to try to help people. In fact, going back to kind of the point you were making before, one of the books we're studying now is The Vegetarian Myth by Leah Keith. She was a vegan vegetarian for like 20 years to her own detriment. She was able to reverse some of the health issues she had by being vegan. Others she will have for the rest of her life, really, really terrible things that was caused by eating a vegan diet. And she made the point, like, this is not good for anything. Eating plant-based, it doesn't help you. It doesn't help the planet. And it's not even better ethically when you really consider it. And she completely destroyed her health. We're reading her book now, and she makes many great points in her book, which I highly recommend. But yeah, it sucks because it's so enticing. And I love the reason why people go plant-based. Like, it's always for the best reasons. It's because I want to save the planet, like I said, or you want to be ethically kind. You don't want to kill a cow, but you don't realize, like, the combine that's going through and killing thousands of animals in a cornfield when it's being harvested. Like, you have to do like so many mental gymnastics to not think that your way of eating is not also killing things. So I understand the motive and why people want to believe this story and that plant-based is better for everything. It's just simply not. It's not better for anything.
Yeah. It's I don't talk about this a lot, but my journey to low carb was, this because I worked with you back in the day when we started to experiment with this on me. I had gotten to a point where I think I had an extra 30 plus pounds that I had put on. And I was a guy where it didn't show. I was wearing a suit every day, and everybody would look at me and think, "Oh, you're fit. You're healthy. You don't look like you have any weight to lose." But I could hide it well when I was wearing a suit, or I could hide it well just about in any clothes. But as soon as my shirt came off, you could tell that everything was soft. I didn't feel good. Mentally, I would have a hard time focusing. Emotionally, I would have these mood swings that would go up and down. I'm like, what the heck is happening? And then just non-stop digestive issues. Um, it was so frustrating. And I remember one day I'm sitting on a the Beltway somewhere in Denver, and I got stuck in traffic. I was on my way to give a lecture, and I'm looking at the time, and then I'm looking at getting stuck, and I'm looking at the time, looking at getting stuck, and I just looped and I cycled and I looped and I cycled and I looped and I cycled, and I had, for the first time in my life, a panic attack, and I had no idea what it was at the time, but my heart rate went up. I felt like everything, the walls were closing in on me. The most logical thing I could think about was get out of the car, and there's the mountains, and go run towards the mountains. And then I came to, in a sense, where I thought, okay, that's not logical. Something's happening. Just breathe. And I paused and I took a few breaths, and eventually the symptoms subsided. And I ended up getting to the place on time. Everything was fine. But I went home, and as I was on the airplane, I was thinking about this. What is causing this? Why is this? And so I started to dig deep. I started to journal. Okay, why am I feeling that way? Is there something wrong with my life? Am I doing something wrong that I needed to be worried about from an emotional or a spiritual standpoint? And really what it came down to, I was like, no, I feel good. Like I feel good, but physically I felt horrible. So I finally came to the realization that over, at the time I had spent not quite 2 decades in health and fitness. And I said, there's one thing I've never tried. I've never tried a high protein, low fat, or low carb diet. So why not give it a try? So I started on it, went through the process of going into keto, went all in, testing ketones, testing blood sugar, tracking everything. And all of a sudden, feelings of anxiousness just went away. And I didn't realize how often I was carrying feelings of anxiousness. Digestive issues went away. Body fat starts to drop. 10 pounds, 15 pounds, 20 pounds starts to go away. I'm getting stronger. My joints are healthier. My skin changes. Everything is just improving. And I didn't get there because of some propaganda. I didn't get there because I believed that that was actually the healthiest way to go. I literally got there out of desperation. And I said, well, shit, this is the last thing. I've never tried this. So why not give it a try?
Yeah.
It was mind blowing. Now, I vacillate during times of the year because what I've found over the years is I do really well on a low carb diet for probably, I used to say about 70 to 80% of the year, probably 60 to 70% of the year at this point. But there are points of the year where I bump my carbohydrates up. And I guess I've got to clarify this. Higher carb for me would be anything over 100 grams, right? I think under 100 grams, a lot of people classify as low carb. Ketogenic, you might be 30 to 50 grams. Am I in the same ballpark here?
Yeah. Yeah. I consider anything low carb 150 or below, just depending on like your activity level and things like that.
Yeah, and maybe body mass and muscle size and whatnot. So there are times where I'll go above 100 or 150 for periods of times. And that's what I consider more of my higher carb time, depending on my activity level and what I'm doing. I just sleep better when I've got more in. But I do the whole, I get my proteins and fats in early in the day. And then I continue with protein throughout the day, but I eat most of my carbohydrates at night because I tend to sleep better. So I feel better, have a lot more energy if I get my proteins and fats early in the day, and then I do carbohydrates at night. Now, I am not recommending that to anybody. I'm just telling you that that is the thing that I found over years currently that works well for me. Talk about your journey. How did you get to this point? You've been carnivore for 5 years. Is that right?
Coming up on 5 years. Yeah. It was April of 2019 that I first started.
So,
Okay.
but before you went carnivore, you were playing in the keto space.
Yeah. So, my journey through health and fitness, in respect to nutrition, being in cycling, you train for cycling, you understand what a cycling diet is. It's a very high carbohydrate diet, classically speaking. I learned from a triathlon coach in 2012 that he was mixing in more fat with his athletes, and they were actually flipping their burning the substrate that they were burning. So rather than burning carbohydrates for fuel, which is like a very like fast acting kind of a fuel, think about like a really explosive thing. It's like a Formula One car type fuel. Lots of pollution, goes really, really fast. Can't have fuel for very long, just about an hour and a half, 2 hours for a race. But the fat stores that even endurance athletes have, they have quite a bit. So if you can flip the burn, then that would really improve things, and they can improve their endurance. You can go for far longer if you're burning fat versus burning carbohydrates. And that was news to me. So I started mixing in more fat in my diet. Somebody gave me an article in like 2014, 2015 or actually it was an interview that was done by Nina Teicholz. And she, of course, is the author of The Big Fat Surprise. I actually did not read The Big Fat Surprise on purpose until 2016. I think it was because of the resistance that I had to that idea of like, okay, if this woman's right, and I think she might be right, like I kind of don't want to read this book because that would mean that everything I've learned from cycling and personal training and all these nutritionists that I've worked with, that's all wrong. That would turn my whole world upside down. So I kind of resisted it. So Big Fat Surprise just kind of tells you that fat is okay and it's been demonized, and here's all the studies and why they're flawed and blah, blah, blah. In 2017, I lost my regional position at Lifetime, as you know, and I decided to replace that. I would go and get my nutrition certification. The nutrition certification that I got was, a very respectable company, and I maintain that certification to this day. But it re-entrenched my belief in like carbohydrates are great, and you need fruits and vegetables and lots of grains, and here's how you balance your meals and that sort of thing.
Crazy
So
high fiber.
yeah, yeah. Remember the software program that
Yeah.
I had purchased that I would put
Yeah.
people on, and you did it for a little while, and
Yep.
it teaches you different concepts and different behaviors about food, and
Yep.
all of that stuff was good. It just, I mean, you remember, like I put how many hundreds of people on that software program. The curriculum runs for 1 year with lessons that it gives you and weekly checkups and things like that. I had two people ever finish that program.
Yeah.
One lost a marginal amount of weight and then gained it back, and one person I don't know how they're doing today, but they lost a little bit of weight, but not much. They all plateaued. And it really wasn't until working with one of our coworkers and good friend, Clark, who came in to do a 60-day challenge. And we sat down to do a consultation. The 60-day challenge was a temporary kind of weight loss contest that we were doing at the time at the gym. And he's describing his diet and he's wanting to lose like 25, 30 pounds. And he's eating cereal in the middle of the night. And I could just recognize like, okay, there's not enough fat really in your diet to make you be really satiated. So get more protein, more fat in, and, let's just start there. And in a few days, he lost a bunch of weight and he came to me and he's like, dude, I've already lost a bunch of weight. What's this keto stuff? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't really know. I've seen it around. I've heard about it, but I don't know that much about it. And, I was getting pigeonholed in that area, and I will always give you credit for helping me. When I came to you and saying like, I don't want to be that guy, like people around the club are calling me Keto Casey. Like I want to be able to help everybody. I don't want to be like niched into this one thing. And you were like, no, you should like do it, like be that person and learn about it. And that was really like the last time I listened to music in my car and like didn't have a podcast on or a book or something in the space, like learning more about it so I could, explain it to people. And eventually that led me to, people that were doing carnivore diets. I'd heard about it from the Joe Rogan podcast with Dr. Sean Baker, which I turned off halfway into because I thought it was absolutely preposterous. This doctor who's uber fit in his 50s, he's only eating ribeyes and he's like crushing his deadlifts and rowing competitions. Like this makes absolutely no sense. You don't need to eat vegetables. But eventually, I studied more about it and decided to try it in April of 2019. I cut all plants out of my diet, and I'm like you, man. Like I felt better. I lost a few pounds. I was already in the keto space, so I already removed a lot of the carbohydrates, but I hadn't gone fully into carnivore. And there was just it's like 10 days, 2 weeks in, it's same, like the anxiety that I didn't even know I had, the spinning around with all the stuff that was never going to happen, just kind of like faded away. And it was replaced by this like feeling of what really was already there, was a feeling of just calmness and peace. And like, whatever happens, happens. And there's just like, the Stoicism talks about like preferred indifferences. Like you would really love to not get sick or have money or whatever good things, but your whole value isn't locked up in that. And that's the way that it felt. And so for me, whenever I cheated on the carnivore diet, especially with sugar, my anxiety came spinning right back. And it was awful to the point of me not really wanting to get off it. And also understanding that like, I'm really not suffering that much by eating steak and eggs every single day. Like I can do that.
Yeah.
It's not that hard for me. You know what I mean? And in the beginning, it sounded like hogwash. It sounded like nonsense that people would come back and say like, why did my psoriasis go away? Like, how come I don't get athlete's foot anymore? Like literally for me, like I always had athlete's foot. I haven't had athlete's foot in years. Like my shoulder, once a year, somehow in hockey, I'd go to poke check something, my shoulder would hurt and I couldn't figure out what it was. That literally hasn't happened to me. I'm a ginger. Like, look, I'm as blonde can be. I, burn in the moonlight and I have not had a sunburn in years. We did a trip to Mexico almost at the equinox, or I'm sorry, not the equinox, the solstice, summer solstice in direct sun where the UV was 13. And in the middle of the day, I used shade, but I never burned. And like, you hear all of these amazing things from people and you think this can't be this one thing. A diet cannot fix seemingly everything. The people that come to me for weight loss try this and then within weeks forget that they even wanted to lose weight. They're losing weight effortlessly, but now they're doing it because their skin cleared up and their IBS went away and Like it's really amazing, and it really just shows exactly what you said earlier in this conversation, that like this is our species appropriate diet. We gave up the ability to process a high amount of carbohydrates without figuring out a way to deal with them. Like, I'm not saying carbohydrates are bad, but we've learned as a species to soak things and ferment things and cook things in a certain way to reduce the harms of these plant foods so that we can use them, and that's totally fine. But we need to remember that the core main food that is bioavailable to us as humans is animal food. And that causes some uncomfortable conversations about killing animals and that sort of thing. And people might not like it, but that is the truth, whether you want to believe it or not. And it's just crazy that everything optimizes in that state. And the state of ketosis, I will very strongly submit, is our natural human birthright and is our natural state of living. Some doctor just came up with a term that was basically a disease that is called like a lack of ketosis. That's kind of how serious this is. Like, people that you see that are 400 pounds are not living in a state of ketosis. They're living in a state of what I call the opposite, glucosis, which I stole from Dr. Dave Champion. It's a different system. It's running the body on sugar versus running the body on proteins and fats. It's a different way of doing things. It's running an emergency system. It's like running that Formula One car all day, every day. It's not designed to do that. It's going to break down way too quick because that's not the right fuel. And so yeah, that's been my journey. I have no intention of stopping anytime soon. I feel amazing, turning 40 this year, and I feel way better than I did in my 30s for sure. I see you through the screen as you're getting older. I can see your bicep veins have bicep veins even on a computer screen. Like, you're reverse aging. Like, you look better and better and better the older you get and the further you do this. This is the proper human diet. It's just that's the fact. It just really is.
I'm convinced, not just from my lifestyle and being around friends like you, but just more of the information that comes out and watching what happens when people adopt whole foods, adopt more protein, put more natural foods into their bodies. What happens? I'm 47 years old. I turned 47 in May, and we're sitting here. I mean, a few days ago, it felt like springtime.
Not so much today.
Technically, it feels like winter now, right? As we're getting towards the tail end of October. But I'm stronger than I've ever been in many of my lifts. The only one that I haven't like truly tested myself on, because I haven't been doing it for a long time, is deadlifts. But squats, I'm stronger. Bench press, I'm stronger. Hip thrusts, I'm stronger. I can do pull-ups with more weight wrapped around my waist than ever. And that's at 47 years old. And I also have this thing that many of my friends and my clients know about, that when my family and we go on hikes together, that we have a challenge called the trail push-ups. And the trail push-ups are basically that whatever your age is, that's the number of push-ups you have to do. So whenever I say, all right, trail push-up time, I got to do 47. Next year, I have to do 48. And so each time we go out hiking, we all have to do our age. And I do that partially because I want to set an example for my kids. And I want to prove to myself that I can continue to get better with age. I think that that's how life is. If we're constantly putting in the consistent inputs, strength training on a regular basis, the right food, then skin doesn't have to go horrible over time. We don't have to have loss of muscle. I love what, I don't know if you like or follow Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, but
yeah, she's amazing. Just came out with a new book.
Yeah. So I want to get the book, but I listened to her on a podcast recently, and she talked about how she put it, that I'll boil it down. Essentially, we have to be lean in order to be healthy. That's the reality. If we're not lean, we're not going to be healthy. Most of the things that kill us are killing us as a byproduct of being overweight. We're dying of heart disease, where, there's all these issues that we're dying of over fatness. But what Dr. Lyon talks about is that we are missing out on this key component of muscle and the importance of protein and the importance of lean muscle. And she said essentially that muscle is our protection against aging. As we build more muscle, we have so many places to now store glycogen, sugar. We have so much more muscle to stabilize our joints. We have so much more muscle to create mobility. I see people stretching on a regular basis. In fact, I was working with a client this morning that had come to us and said, hey, I want to improve my flexibility. If this is what I've been doing, here's what my stretching routine is. What do you think? Now, I used to do yoga from time to time. I used to stretch on a regular basis. I no longer do those things because what I found was that my mobility was limited because I was weak in some other area. And so, just like this client that we were working with this morning, where he's constantly stretching, I said, let's address a couple of the weakness issues. So, we addressed the weakness issues within 10 minutes. I say, okay, now bend over, touch your toes, tell me how you feel. He's like, holy shit, my hips haven't been this open ever. Like, did we do any stretching? Did we do anything for the hips? No. Okay. So we have a strength issue. Muscle and strength gives us longevity, gives us mobility. We age if we don't have those things. What are you doing and what do you recommend your clients do to maintain and build muscle?
Man, yeah, I absolutely love that. I couldn't agree more. Her work is amazing. I actually got to meet her at Low Carb Denver as well. She's like 4 feet tall, dude. Gabrielle Lyon is like
Is she really?
really, really
Oh,
short,
wow.
but she is so strong. Yeah, super, super strong. No, I totally agree. It's you see it in people that are aging. We become anabolic resistant. Our body naturally wants to hold on to muscle less and
Yep.
less. And I look at somebody like my grandpa, he's 93 years old. He does not lift weights, but he's still riding his bike every single day, like 10 miles. It's like super cool.
That's
Um,
awesome.
it's way awesome. And so, yeah, and they hang out with each other, my grandparents, and they laugh every single day until they cry, and they're hilarious. But yeah, they're super interesting, and I attribute his longevity mostly to his strength. He had a kind of a really mechanical type career and had to work with his hands a lot, so he was very strong, even though again he wasn't like lifting weights. So what do I do and what do I recommend to my clients? This summer, for some reason, I just kind of didn't really want to be inside that much, and I decided to take some time off of strength training. So I took maybe like 4 or 5 months off of strength training, where I did my same like normal day-to-day stuff. I rode my bike a lot. I try to get about 20,000 steps a day if I can. I'll always do 100 push-ups a day. At some point. And so I kept those things up. But in this time that I deliberately decided not to strength train, I just said like, okay, I'm not going to strength train. I'm going to focus more on some of these other activities that I really love. But what I am going to do is I'm going to make sure that I'm continuing to eat a good amount of protein. And so by doing a body composition test before and after this 4 or 5 month period, I really reduced my muscle mass by like 1 pound. It basically like almost didn't even change by that much. Now,
Which let's pause for just a second because when most people go on a diet, they will lose, if they're not exercising and the protein is not adequate, they'll lose about a 50-50 split of muscle and fat.
mm, yeah, yeah, they really will, and they crash their metabolic rate along the
Right.
way.
Right.
Which
So the fact
then
that you only lost a pound is just unbelievable.
yeah, yeah. I was able to maintain it pretty good. And like I said, I wasn't like inactive, but I definitely wasn't like looking to build more muscle or anything. But I told you at the beginning of this conversation, I found a space where I can train my people in the winter that I, normally train outside in the summertime. And it's a really fun kind of environment, a really positive place. And so I've decided to start back up with my strength training now. And what I do is just a form of strength training that's moving weight very, very slowly. I move it all the way to like true failure until I'm like shaking. You get to that point where you're really anxious and you really want to stop, and you just try to push like another like 2 reps past that. You're not like totally destroyed, but just trying to get to the mental space of like, okay, this is tough, but I've got this. I'm going to live in this area. I'm going to live with this pain for just a little bit longer. Let me keep pushing. I try to do mostly like total body splits. But I'm deliberately trying to send a signal to my body that says that my current level of strength is inadequate and I need my body to get stronger. So when you go to a gym, as you well know, and you lift a weight and you do 3 sets to 10 and you finish your third set and 10th rep and you were able to do it, your body just goes, okay, nice. Like we did it. We were able to do it. It was fine. You moved, but there's no need to like make yourself stronger because you were already able to do what you needed to do. When you
Right.
push yourself to that kind of level where you can't really push that much anymore, your body thinks like, holy shit, like, okay, he tried to push something. The body doesn't know whether it's a boulder or a bear or whatever it is. Like it just knows it needs to get stronger. And so that sends a signal to your body to go to work to start to make you stronger. And, when you walk out of the gym, you're always in worse shape than when you walked into the gym. But when you give yourself the recovery time and the rest and the sleep and all that stuff, that's when your body is building itself up to be stronger. And so between those few things, it's really just kind of a cycle, in my opinion, of like kind of three different principles. Like one, you need to be sending that signal to your body, so you need to lift heavy things. Two, you need to recover. Get your rest in after you're done lifting. Make sure you're, recovering, resting, getting great sleep, that kind of thing. And then three, you need the raw materials. Like, how are you going to build something if you don't have the raw materials? And so with muscle, obviously that's protein. We need to be consuming a decent amount of protein. And when you focus your diet on the protein, it always in nature comes with fat. It never comes with carbohydrate unless you're talking about certain dairy. If you just focus on those things and let everything else kind of fall out of the way, your body has this great natural way of telling you when you've eaten enough food because you become satiated. Satiation is different than fullness. Like if I go to lunch and I have a salad and it's got some chicken in it, maybe like a light dressing, I will be full. Like I will stop eating at some point because I don't want any more food. But being full doesn't mean that in 2 hours I'm not going to be starving, which is going to happen if I eat that salad. And people don't recognize that the foods that they're eating are literally making them so hungry in like 2 to 3 hours.
Right.
If I
Right.
like this morning, I had 10 eggs when I felt like I wanted to eat, and I am not thinking about food right now. I feel really good. I've got really good energy because I'm satiated, and that's what allows me to eat twice a day and no more, and eat as much protein as I like. And I wolf it down, and it sounds amazing until I get to this one bite where I'm like, nope, I'm done. Like I don't want that anymore. So I think those three principles, they might not be the sexiest, they might not be, the influencer friendly type program that you see on Instagram, but it's a principle that works. And as long as you can live with those principles and make something work for yourself, you can become really strong. And I agree with you 100%. I think muscle is the organ of longevity.
Yeah. Talk about some of the keys to success in creating a healthy body. What are some of the hidden keys? What are some of the observable keys?
Oh man, it's a really good question. Um, yeah, it's partially hidden. It's like hidden in plain sight. I don't know how else to say it, but like I think hidden in plain sight is the fact, pretty much kind of what I just said about like the simplicity of things really trips people up. And it people I'll always ask this in a consultation. Do you want things to be more simple or do you want things to be more complicated? And everybody says the same thing. Oh, it has to be more simple. I need things simple. My life is already complicated enough. Please make this as simple as possible. And I'll say, okay, great. So strength train, make sure you're lifting, pretty close, adjacent to failure. Eat lots of protein, eat lots of fat until you're fully satiated. Get good sleep. Let's identify maybe two or three other things that are problems specifically to you. And let's just start with that. And then inevitably people will be like asking about what about such and such supplement? And it's like, you can if you want, like that's fine. What about such and such meal plan? It's like, okay, but that comes with now a shopping list and all these recipes. Like I thought you said you wanted simple. Like we want to get in our own ways, or we're taught by the fitness industry that like it's almost like a gatekeeper. Like you need the professionals, you need the programs, you need these things, and they can be helpful for sure, but at the same time, if you follow those simple principles, you're probably going to end up in the right place anyway. I often wonder what is the difference between people that are successful in health and fitness and the people that just don't ever seem to really get it and get on the path. And I think that's part of it. Making things a little bit too complicated. And I think the other part of it is more like a mindset thing. We tend to have these like fixed goals that we're trying to get to. I need to lose 30 pounds for this wedding. I want to, I want to do this hike or this race. And so we want to get to a certain endpoint, and then people kind of jump off and say like, okay, I got to here. Now let me eat cake and soda again and stop working out. It's like, you need to think of this as a journey. It's a constant improvement. It's part of why, the reason why I like your podcast so much is that's a big thing that you guys talk about all the time, is like, this is a project that you will have for the rest of your life. It's not something you gain today and then you automatically have for the rest of your life. Just think of this as like, these are the good principles that got you to this point and helped you make progress. Continue to leverage them to some degree for the rest of your life to continue to see success. So I think, yeah, those are the ones I would say they're hidden and they're kind of obvious. They're kind of hidden in plain sight because, again, we're talking about industries, right? Like people make a lot of money when we make things really complicated. So if people remember that to just keep things simple, lift heavy things, if that means a band over a tree, like in your yard, like do that. Like that's fine. Focus on a human species appropriate diet, which is mostly proteins and fats, a lot of animal products. Like those things are the ways that you can leverage that to be very simple and keep things easy for people so they can stay engaged.
What have you personally changed about your overall health and practice in the last 2 or 3 years?
The biggest one and first thing that comes to mind is I've moved completely to minimalist footwear. So some people might not think that has to do with like health and fitness, but I absolutely think that it does. We're sold shoes. We're sold a story about shoes that like having this like big elevated heel and cushy shoe is like really
Yep.
really good for us,
Right.
and it pitches us unnaturally forward. And Bethany in particular treats a ton of people that have really tons of issues all the way up the chain, from knees to hips, ankles, anything going up that really stems from improper footwear and foot health. And so one thing that I've done, which I didn't want to do, is get rid of all of my shoes. I had tons of different shoes that were expensive and I like them and they look cool. And I've moved over to more minimalist footwear. So today was a little bit colder. I use an actual shoe. Generally speaking, I only use a sandal that kind of straps on my foot called Earth Runners, which I absolutely love. And I would say that's the thing that I've changed in the last, couple of years, because of the impacts that it's also had on the rest of my health and fitness. My joints feel as good as they've ever felt. My feet literally have gotten bigger. They have gotten more muscular. My toes spread much more, and so I can feel the ground when I walk around barefoot. Like you feel your toes like grabbing onto the earth, and you just have this like better base of stability that then creates mobility in certain other places up the chain. And so that's been the biggest thing I would say that I've changed more recently. If I push out another 4 or 5 years from that, I would say the biggest thing that I've changed in my training style is the style that I lift with. I do a lot less of what you and I were trained in, which is like quote unquote like functional training, like trying to do
Right.
hockey looking exercises in a gym that's not hockey, versus let me do workouts that make me very strong, and then let me take the rest of the time to go practice hockey in the right context. That's been the biggest thing that I've changed in the last like 4 or 5 years. But if I'm looking more in the last couple of years, really transitioning off of traditional shoes and getting onto minimalist shoes has been pretty awesome, actually.
Aside from the sandals, what shoes do you wear?
So I do the Earth Runner sandals. Those are my favorite. Traditionally, I've done Vivo Barefoots, and I will give them a shout out. They do great. They make great shoes. That's what I wore today. In I don't know what it's like. I haven't ordered a pair of them in quite a while. So I don't know what it's like today. When I was ordering them pretty consistently, their inventory was pretty tough. They wouldn't always have the style I needed in the right size. And they were pretty pricey. And I think they still kind of are. I found a brand of shoes on Amazon. I think it's called Witten, and they're kind of like knit on the top, and they're minimal on the bottom. They've got a wide toe box, and the same kind of principles apply for a lot of these shoes. You want to be able to like fold it up. You could put it in your pocket if you needed to. It's wide enough for your toes. Your toes can kind of spread. I found this brand of shoe that cost me $35. I figured that's a pretty low barrier to entry. I don't think this will last very long, but I might as well like try it for $35. They're awesome. They last a really long time. They look really nice. I walk a lot and I put a lot of miles onto them, and they are holding up awesome. So I might stick with that brand for at least a little while because it seems to be working really well. A lot of people like Zeros. I've tried Zeros in the past. They don't really work with my feet really, but between those other brands, I really like those. And I have other things like different toe spacers and things that I like massage my feet on when I'm sitting and doing computer work later in the day that really, it makes a difference. It makes a huge difference to me.
Yeah, I was going to ask about Zeros. That's what I've switched over to.
Cool.
I found right now those work really well. In fact, we were in Chicago about a month and a half ago, and we got 30, I don't know what it was, 32, 33,000 steps in one day, just wandering around town. Did it all in Zero shoes. And I thought, oh man, these are, I wonder how my feet are going to feel at the end of the day. And that was great. No issues, no problems. In fact, one of the first things I do with anybody, if they've got a shoulder issue or a hip issue or a digestive issue, is we start from the feet and we switch them over to a minimalist shoe. And it's amazing the impact that has just in the first 2 weeks. Because when you can change the bone structure of the feet and you can get the toes to spread and you're grabbing the floor or the ground, you're creating the base of your body, right? Which goes up into the knees, which then goes up into the hips, which allows us to stabilize your hips better. I love Hoka's because they send me a lot of clients. They don't know that they do, but I love them. I call them the train bra or the push-up bra of the shoe world. It's like makes everybody feel good because they throw all this padding on. And I know every time I see somebody with a Hoka, I'm like, that's a client if I want them, because they're walking around in the push-up bra of the shoe world. They're masking a problem. And so
Yeah,
I love Hoka for sending me a lot of business. Just like I
that's.
used to love CrossFit for sending me a lot of business.
I was just going to say it's why CrossFit was invented, maybe by orthopedic surgeons or something.
Yeah. Yeah. CrossFit and Hoka are two of my favorite brands for sending
Amazing.
me business because it's like broken people that we're just masking.
Uh, that's funny.
Casey, if there's something that you used to believe that you no longer do, what is it?
Carbohydrates are essential in the diet. Um, Carbohydrates are essential inside the body. There's no question. You need a certain amount of sugar in the body. You need
Yeah.
to have certain parts of your body running on carbohydrates. They are absolutely essential inside the body. They are not essential dietarily. Your body has an amazing system where it can make as much carbohydrate as it needs whenever you want on its own. It does that from the breakdown of proteins and fats, makes exactly the right amount of carbohydrate that you need all the time. Again, I'm really not trying to demonize carbohydrates and say that they're the worst for everybody all the time. It's just we have way too many of them. They're way too processed. They're added to with tons of seed oils, which are horribly inflammatory. Like you're not going to thrive if you're eating a high amount of them. You don't have the storage
Right.
space for them. It's just that simple. And so again, getting my nutrition certification, learning about the brain and how it needs carbohydrates, I'm like, oh wow, okay, like this is great. Yeah, it needs a small amount of carbohydrates, but it can actually run on ketones up to about 80%, and it does so preferentially. It looks like the brain wants the ketones anyway. And when we're seeing all this disease and calling dementia the third diabetes, and diabetes itself is poisoning from carbohydrates, you literally are taking in more carbohydrates than your body can use and control until your insulin goes through the roof and you can't produce any more. Look at all the death and disease that's causing from some of those things, and it comes from the overconsumption of carbohydrates. So again, the biggest thing that I've changed my mind on, again, from doing my nutrition certification, is thinking like carbohydrates are essential. You need them with every meal. Make sure you balance them out. To like, wait a second, no, you don't actually need them. Your body will make them. Why my nutrition certification only has one single sentence about ketosis and what it is. It's got one sentence of an entire metabolic pathway that seems to be the preferred metabolic pathway for humans. There's one sentence in this nutrition manual that's like 600 pages. We're talking about like eat the rainbow and control your feelings and count for calories and all these ridiculous things that don't really help people. That's the biggest thing I've changed my mind about. Like whether somebody ever wants to do carnivore or try carnivore, like people can have one carnivore meal and just see how you feel. Have steak and eggs tonight and see how that is. Like you don't need to do this diet forever, but you can try it and you can see what it's like to not eat carbohydrates. And if you feel better, try it again. If you feel better, try it again. That's what I did. And I learned that for me, it's not worth it to have anxiety. Pizza is great. Ice cream is great. It is not worth a few minutes of something tasting good for then to me, like spin in anxiety for several hours. It's not worth it for me, but people can try again. So that's the biggest thing that I've changed my mind about, is that carbohydrates are central.
I love that. My experience, I just got to throw this plug in there. As I went low carb, one of the things that I went back to and tested, and you and I went back and forth on this as after I got diagnosed with ADHD, is I went back and tested how my body responded and at what levels carbohydrates were effective and which ones they weren't. Essentially, the lower I went, the better I was up to a certain point. But I still found that brain clarity, and I literally went through and I tested, I think it was, what did I do, 90 days, 60 days, something like that. I got to go back and look at my notes. And I wrote down every day, okay, how does my memory? How's my brain clarity? How's my focus? How's my overall energy? And I tracked these markers and I watched based on being in states of ketosis, and I tracked my blood and I looked at all those things. And the one thing that I found was my brain functions better on a lower carbohydrate diet. And so as a 47-year-old man with ADHD, I take no medication. I am on very few supplements. The only supplements that I take just for performance. I take creatine, I take glutamine, I take calcium, magnesium, zinc, and that's about it. I don't take a lot of extra. I'll kind of rotate between ginseng and gacha cola and a few other things just for performance. And I feel better at certain times of the year taking some of those things, but outside of that, I eat food and it's amazing. And eating in a low carbohydrate way helps my brain to function. So
Yeah.
you want to control emotions, control the food, because
Yeah.
we've got the mechanism backwards. We think, oh, control your emotions so you can control your food. No, just eat the food. And over time, you're going to find that your emotions will be, much more under control.
Yeah.
Well, Casey, if people want to learn more about you and the great work that you're doing, obviously they can find you at Boundless Body Radio, wherever podcasts are listened to. So whatever you're listening to this podcast on, you can jump over and listen to any of Casey's great episodes on Boundless Body Radio, and I highly recommend it. Where else can they go to get more information about you, to find more about you, and or coach with you?
Yeah, for sure. So the best place to go is just our website, which is called myboundlessbody.com. That has the podcast there. It's got all our socials. I've been pretty disorganized with our social media. As we started the company, I kind of converted my personal over to the Boundless Body, whatever. And so I don't even really know the names of them, but they're tagged on the website. Just go there. And then, we do have a button just right on the homepage that says book now, and anybody anywhere in the world can book a consultation with us. Yesterday, I talked to somebody from New Zealand who just had some questions about breaking through a plateau on a low carbohydrate diet, which was really fun. And I've recently just had people literally that had just said like, hey, I just want to say hi. Like, that's been way cool to like meet people. So anybody can do that. We can chat about anything. We do offer, different services, but that chat itself is complimentary. We offer it for free and want to make that a very high value for people. And hopefully after a 30-minute chat, people are walking away with 2 or 3 bullet points of things they can be working on their own. So best place to go is just myboundlessbody.com.
Well, Casey Ruff, my good friend, thanks so much for coming back on. Always a great time to chat. And I love the podcast. I loved the episode that you did where you pulled everything together for this Blue Zone thing. And I thought as soon as I started listening to it, I'm like, we got to talk about this. I haven't discussed this at all on our podcast. And I think it's something that people need to hear about. They need to understand what is being put out there relative to this dogma and this propaganda. And I think you and your guests did an amazing job of debunking a lot of the lies that are out there. So thanks for coming on and sharing with our listeners today.
Thank you so much. It's always an honor to talk to you. Always a lot of fun.
Yeah, great to have you. And on that note, folks, it is time for us to wrap up another episode of The Evolved Man. Casey Ruff, thanks again for coming on, sharing your knowledge and wisdom with our amazing listeners. Guys, remember that it does take time and consistency to evolve. But first, you have to disrupt. And now it's time for you to get out there and evolve. Thanks for joining me today for this episode of The Evolved Man. If you're learning from and gaining value from this podcast, please subscribe to the Evolved Man newsletter, where I can support you even more in your personal evolution. I want to help you reverse engineer your success. The Evolved Man newsletter is like getting a free coaching session to keep you moving forward on your path of personal success. Go to theevolvedmanpodcast.com to sign up today. If you found value in this episode, you can give us up to a 5-star rating on Apple and Spotify and share it with your network. That's the best way to support the podcast so we can continue to get great guests and provide you with the best wisdom for your daily life. Until next time, keep evolving.
So thank you again so much for listening to this bonus episode. Like we said in the introduction, be sure to follow, subscribe, all the things that you can do on the Evolved Man podcast with Steve Cutler. Be sure to give him a rating and review. As always, we ask you the same thing. If you don't mind giving us a 5-star rating and review on Apple, although if you haven't done it by now, you're probably not going to do it anyway, so maybe I should stop asking for that. But it is a great way for us to get our message out to more people and to keep the podcast ad-free. So thank you again for listening to and supporting Boundless Body Radio.